Well, thank you everyone for joining the event. Super excited for our chat today. My name is Matt Mike, and I'm joined today by the great and powerful Greg Deckler and Brian Julius. Kind of a surreal moment for me, to be honest. I admire these guys so much. They're true experts in their field. They know Power BI to an insane level. And the best word to describe how I feel just even being a part of this event is humbled. So really grateful to get to host this discussion. You're going to be hearing from a lot of them today. And we're going to dive into a few different topics. I'll be asking them some questions, and then we want to have a nice, strong Q&A session towards the end. So if you got some Power BI questions, be thinking of those, be ready to ask. And these are the guys to ask right here. We'll have a good discussion before then. Before we jump in, just want to mention Greg just released an amazing book called the Microsoft Power BI Cookbook, 3rd edition. It's an insane read. It's so great. It's such a good book. He covers pretty much, or not just Greg, it's also Brett Powell, that we only have Greg in the chat with us today. Both amazing. But the book, it goes through basically everything you need to know about Power BI, but then just like takes it to the umph degree. So he'll take a topic and just kind of like inject it with some steroids to just make it like super powered, supercharged, every section. So you can read it as a total newbie and just walk away from it with a really strong understanding of how to do a lot. I've gone through the whole book, but I'm still making my way through the entire thing in practice. I want to really like go through the entire thing and work through all the examples. It's amazing. So just wanted to mention that because we'll be talking a little bit about the book today, published by Pact. But to start our time today, I wanted to ask Greg, what are some of the biggest differences between the 2nd edition and the 3rd edition? Obviously, this is the 3rd one, had editions before that. What are some of the key differences?
Yeah, so in writing the 3rd edition of the book, and when I kind of took the title over from Brett when I wrote the 2nd edition. And what that means is that Brett's still involved in writing it, but I'm the one that's actually kind of driving the first drafts and then getting feedback from Brett, on what he kind of changes he wants and all of that thing. And so when I took over the 2nd edition, there were a few things that I thought were some things I wanted to correct from this first edition. Namely, like Brett was using a kind of a custom AdventureWorks database in the 1st edition, and it's not something that really I could replicate every recipe because I didn't have that kind of custom AdventureWorks database. So one of the goals for the 2nd edition was really to get it all standardized on a standard AdventureWorks database so that basically anybody could just install AdventureWorks and be able to go through it. And I really felt an obligation because people really liked the 1st edition book. I felt really an obligation to keep the same, recipes, update them as much as possible, add some new ones, things like that. With the 3rd edition, I guess I felt a little bit more around, I had some creative leeway to be able to really change the book around and because I'd already standardized it on the AdventureWorks, I could take the next step forward to try to simplify the recipes and make them, a lot more straightforward. There were some recipes that were still out there that are super complicated, and literally you could spend hours, on one recipe and getting, doing all the steps involved. So I wanted to kind of chop those down and simplify it and make it more accessible for more people, I guess you could say. So that was really I think that's one of the biggest changes between the 2nd edition and the 3rd edition. I think the 3rd edition is far more approachable for people that don't know a lot about Power BI and stays out of a lot of the technical weeds that, it's kind of cool to do if you've got your nerd hat on, but not everybody needs to go down to that level. So.
Yeah, I can say, having not read the 2nd edition, I've only read the 3rd at this point, but for being so technically deep, it's very approachable and it's actually a pretty easy read, which I think with these kind of books, they can be intimidating to approach. You know, like you watch a video or something, it's a little bit easier to digest most of the time. And books like these can be intimidating, but like very smooth and easy read. And it walks through each recipe, each concept, very like step by step and very in depth. It's very easy to follow along. So I love that.
I'm happy to hear that, Mike, because that was one of the big goals going into that book. So I'm really happy to hear you say that.
Yeah, well, kudos. You accomplished that goal.
You know, one of the things that if I can jump in, that I think really improved even from the second to the third version is it's really a learn by doing book now. You know, that it's always had kind of a practical aspect to it, but it's really optimized now, Greg, where I think you took that AdventureWorks database and you can now download the file and kind of start right in, you know, from the start of that chapter into the exercise. And kind of what Matt was saying is, you know, I've always had this this experience where in some respect, the better the book is or the better the video is, the more I kind of read and go, okay, I get that. And then I sit down and do it and I have no idea what I'm doing. You know, it's like that dog meme, you know, just staring at the, you know, the dog staring at the computer. And, you know, when I've gone through the recipes in this book, I've actually downloaded the files and then jumped in and started doing some of the stuff. And it really clarifies it and cements it in a way that I think is just really optimal, that you don't have to do a lot of data cleaning and preparation of a data model. You can just kind of jump right into where that chapter starts.
Yep, that was another goal, Brian. You hit the nail on the head with that one. In order to simplify the recipes, I found that in the second edition, there was a lot of, you're kind of starting from scratch. And so you're repeating the same exact steps in order to prep and get ready for the recipe over and over again. And I figured that's ridiculous, right? And, you know, why put people through that misery? So like this is my 7th book with PAC, so I've had some time to work out some of the kinks and all of that. So, but yeah, a lot of times I'll provide a start PBIX and then you have a finish PBIX.
Right.
And that way, if you just want to immediately jump into, you know, and kind of short circuit that getting ready for that recipe, just download the start PBIX and start again, go for it. And then you have the final, you know, the finish PBIX to compare, you know, did you do things right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always like seeing that too. Yeah, to your point, Brian, like it's really nice to see the like the data sets you get to work with. Like there's the GitHub repository with all the resources you need, but it's just laid out in a way that I found very helpful as I'm working through it. And so I was wondering too, with the third edition, are there any specific challenges you had with that book? It's a big book. So I'm wondering if there were any specific challenges you had. Right?
Yeah. And people are, I think, yeah, sorry, you're kind of freezing up a little bit, at least for me. I don't know about for anybody else. So challenges with the book, probably the biggest challenge was that I needed to fit this book into 600 pages, as it were. The second edition was already well past that at like 650 pages, I believe. And so, and we wanted to add a bunch of content. We wanted to add an entire chapter on fabric, and there were a bunch of new recipes that we wanted to add. So there was a lot of creativity in terms of, okay, how can I consolidate, like not lose some of the information, but consolidate recipes together so that they're combined into one and kind of shorten things up there. And so there was just a ton of work that had to go into trying to fit this entire book into 600 pages so that could be printed in color. And I really wanted it to be printed in color. You know, I have my author complaints, which you get reviews on Amazon and you'll get a 1-star review and like it's not in color. I'm like, I don't have any control over that. Right? It's like, really, you had to leave me a 1-star review over that. So I really wanted this book to be printed in color. So getting to that, pulling that off was no easy feat. And we still didn't technically accomplish it because the secret that I wanted to tell everybody is that there is actually a 14th chapter to this book. And I'm going to go ahead and post the link So basically what happened is they came at me just late in the publishing process, literally like 3 days before the book goes live. And they're like, we got to cut a chapter. And, it'll be an online chapter. And so I'm like, okay. And they asked me what chapter that I wanted to cut. And the one that got cut was actually originally chapter 10. It was on administering and governing Power BI. So that was the one I decided to cut because I felt that of all the chapters, that one applied to the least number of people, if you will. Like, every other chapter could be used by pretty much any Power BI user that's out there. Administering and governing kind of applies to a small subset of those people. So that's the one that was chosen. My original understanding was that there was going to kind of like in Mastering PowerShell, that's got like 3 or 4 different online chapters by Pact, that there was going to be a QR code or something to get access to that chapter. But somehow that didn't make it in there. At least I haven't found it in my print copies or online copies. But I did get authorization from Pact to like share the URL with everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and post that in the chat. So right now, here is the lost chapter. The lost chapter. So it is no longer lost, if you will. So
it has been found. Well, there you go. If you're attending this today, there's a little bonus for you. You probably weren't expecting. Bonus chapter.
Yeah. The only reference to it that was out there was in the GitHub repository. I reorganized that recently and made a directory for chapter 14. There is some actual content out there that's downloadable from the GitHub repository for the book, but that was the only hint that it even existed until now.
Nice. Made fully public now.
Fully public.
Great. Well, I'd love to dive into some different topics. Greg, you ran a poll a few days before the event asking what people would like to hear about the most. And DAX won by a long slide. So wanted to prompt some DAX discussion here. And I mean, when you get these guys going with any of this, we could go on for a while, which is good. I want to hear plenty. I want to have lots of content for this event. A rather popular one, if you've been following Greg for a while, or Greg, he's really big on no calculate. And to never use the calculate function. And there are much more efficient ways to write your DAX queries aside from calculate, even though calculate is treated in the mainstream as a relatively foundational function. So, and you talk about this concept a little bit in the book. So I wanted to see if you could give us a quick explanation on that topic, because I think it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, I did sneak a little bit of no calculate into certain chapters of the book. Creative license there. So no calculate, that approach really came out of a presentation I did a long time ago. It was actually for Enterprise DNA back in the day, around DAX counterculture, and how there were a lot of things that happened. And so not using calculate was the most popular one that came out of that presentation. It's the one that stuck, if you will. But there's a lot of other things that Brian and I have talked about a lot in terms of different approaches to DAX, and like time intelligence and using offsets and not using calculate and, just ways to make DAX. Everyone complains that DAX is complicated and DAX is hard, and it really doesn't have to be. It's just that you're trying to learn one of the hardest functions in DAX right off the bat, and that is calculate. It's one of the most difficult functions to really understand what's going on. It's super complicated. It's really black boxy, and I think, half of SQL BI's website is dedicated to explaining calculate sometimes, right? There's blog articles after blog articles after blog articles about expanded tables and filter context and context transition and all these things that really just kind of go out the window if you just don't use calculate and you just approach it and learn the basics of DAX in a much more simplified manner. And that's really the message of no calculate. It's not never use calculate, because there's reasons to use it. But if you're starting out in DAX, don't start learning quantum mechanics, right? Start with mass, force, acceleration, velocity, just the basics, right? Because calculate's the quantum mechanics of DAX. So that's really the fly. Brian, I know you probably have input on this topic as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, and if you go back to 2015, Calculate was essential because DAX didn't have variables. But for the past 9 years, it's been an optional function, but it's treated as, it's kind of like every week I see somebody post, it's the most important function in DAX. And it's just not. It was in 2015, but we're kind of past that now. And as Greg said, it's a fine-tuning function. It's an optimization function, and you can live a perfectly happy Power BI life without ever touching it. And the other thing that Greg mentioned in the counterculture, and I want to kind of just getting back to the book a little because it's something I love in the book, is chapter 6 is, it says getting serious about data intelligence. And, Greg's always, kind of harping on the name because, time intelligence it's not about time. It's typically about dates. And, so he's kind of a stickler on that one. But the thing about that is that there is such an easier way to do that, and it's such a easier way to learn. It's more performant. It's more flexible. There are 40 functions in the DAX guide you can just throw into the center of the ocean and never look at it again. And there really hasn't been kind of a comprehensive write-up of exactly how to do that. I've got some pieces, Greg's got some pieces, Melissa's got some pieces, but that chapter 6 in the Power BI cookbook is, I think, the most comprehensive, kind of best introduction to that offset approach. That I have 120 books in my data library, and that's the best explanation I've got on my shelf.
Yeah, I think to your point, it's funny because I think at some point a while ago, about a year ago or more, I posted something about Calculate, and Brian, you kind of subtly called me out and opened my eyes.
I'm sorry, man.
No, it was great. You opened my eyes to the no Calculate approach. I actually shared some of Greg's content with me on the topic, and that was pretty mind-blowing. And, it was a bit of a learning curve, like kind of learning to get off of Calculate and get to some better approaches. It could be a bit of a learning curve just because we're not used to that, but it's so much more efficient, and it's a lot easier once you understand it, So I just had to mention that because it's funny because I at one point was singing the praises of Calculate until I learned a better way.
Well, yeah, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, if it's working for you, I'm a big fan of, hey, whatever works well for you, rock and roll with that, But I think for a lot of folks it just doesn't, and I think the fact that DAX wins like every poll that you see up of, what topic do you want to hear about? It's always DAX, which is funny because I personally don't think DAX is at all the most important thing about Power BI. That I think you can, if you're really good with data modeling and you're really good with SQL or M, you can get by being pretty mediocre with DAX. And so, but it's interesting. It kind of occupies this huge thought space in the community, and I think part of it is, because people really struggle with it.
Yeah, and I think that's really a lot of times where the no calculate approach, I think, has a lot of value is so much of the blog content and other content that's available on Power BI is really driven by IT nerds, right? I mean, we're all like me. I'm super technical. I like digging into things and all of that, but I don't think it's even close to being like 80% of the Power BI users out there, right? A lot of the users out there they're coming from Excel or they're in Excel, right? And they're just business users that are trying to get, an answer to a question. And they have very simple data models, single table data models, things like that. And they're just trying to get a calculation to work. And then, they trying to use calculate, and calculate, somehow gives them some weird, answer and they can't understand. And they ask questions about it on the forums. And that was really where, the no calculate approach came from, was me answering questions on the forums and even me trying to get Calculate to do something, and they'd be like, well, that doesn't work with my data model. And it's because I'm building a star schema and stuff. And they're like, no, it's just a single table, Greg. And it's like, and your calculation doesn't work with it. So I started, doing alternative approaches and kind of landed on this, hey, create a couple vars, create a table var, X aggregator, boom. And it works every time. So, I mean, that's really where it kind of came from. And that's simple. That's something simple that I can teach to any business user is that one pattern works for everything. Just use it and move on with your life.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing some of the context behind that too. It's interesting too because even when I have used like ChatGPT to solve some DAX problems, I've noticed that it will take that approach oftentimes, where it'll give me a variable approach, something like that. Sometimes we'll still use Calculate, whatever. But I was almost surprised to see it taking that approach because I would consider it a less mainstream approach. I guess ChatGPT just knows the more optimal way. But speaking of that topic, I know, Brian, you posted just the other day, a day or two ago, about the insane DAX problem-solving capabilities of OpenAI's new ChatGPT model. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that is wild because, it was funny. Greg and I have been planning for about a month now this thing we were going to call Rock'em Sock'em DAX bots, and we were going to pit Claude and ChatGPT 4.0 against each other. We were each going to take a bot and kind of see how it performed in a really difficult expert problem. And the funny thing is, on Thursday night, OpenAI dropped what has long been rumored for about 6 months. Was originally called Q-Star, then it was called Strawberry, and they finally dropped the logic portion of it. And it's the first model that actually does advanced reasoning, and it is lights out. I mean, we kind of had to rethink the Rock'em Sock'em DAX bots because it would have been like 1985 Mike Tyson just like running across the ring, like knocking people out in one punch. I mean, it took 7 of the hardest DAX problems, Greg and I could come up with. It took 5 of them and it answered them on the first shot. And the other 2, it answered with just a minimal reprompt, that I just said basically, okay, that's throwing blanks on all the, on all the columns. And it said, oh, okay, I understand why that is. And it just went through and reanalyzed the whole thing. There was actually a fascinating one that I'm going to post later tonight, where it gave the whole logic for why it put the solution together. It starts checking it row by row, and in the middle of checking it, it says, ooh, I just realized there is an edge condition that I didn't take into account. Let me go back and redo the solution to take account of that. It redoes the solution and then provides the full row by row check, and then the explanation of why it didn't catch it initially and why the second solution is more robust. And that was without a single additional prompt by me. I mean,
so as it was calculating the response, it caught its what it overlooked or the mistake it made and corrected it on the spot.
Yeah, and this is really the advance, is that in the past, what my understanding of the AI models were doing, these large language models were basically predicting the next token or the next word. They were basically like a really sophisticated version of autocorrect. And now with the new model, it's actually thinking and reasoning in a much more sophisticated way. And it's making DAX look simple. I was floored by how good it was. I mean, we were trying to find the most difficult problem. Greg had a couple that he's like, I think this one's going to roll into the ditch and think this is recursive, and it just nails it out of the box.
That's insane. So what do you think that, how do you think that will affect the average Power BI developer? What that means for analysts? Just curious, like your take on that as an implementation into day-to-day work.
And that's a hell of a question because, I think, I've heard some really smart people like Jensen Huang say it's not sensible for people to learn to code anymore. And I don't think that's true. I think coding teaches you problem solving. It teaches you how to break down complex problems. It teaches you kind of logical thought patterns, but it's quickly getting to the point where I don't think it's going to be necessary. I think it's going to be valuable, but the ability to code, SQL or DAX or any of this at an advanced level is just not going to be something most people do anymore. And I think that day is coming much faster than people realize.
Yeah, I know the NVIDIA CEO said, earlier this year that that's kind of his goal. He wants to eliminate the need for coding so that we don't have this barrier in between objective and solution. Yeah, as it pertains to code, which I just think is an interesting perspective because I agree with you that learning to code, there's enormous benefits, but ChatGPT or AI just does make it quite easy. Greg, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few. I mean, I think the biggest challenge is not the coding necessarily; it's the translation of business requirements, into code, right? And what people mess up primarily, and I don't see us getting around anytime soon. That I don't see AI fixing this problem is, what we struggle with, at least I do as a consultant in that, is getting our customers to actually give us the business requirements, right? And we'll go through and do sessions with them and do meeting after meeting with them and collect business requirements. And we'll get all the way to delivering those business requirements. And then they're doing UAT testing and, there's like 7 new requirements that come out. It's like, how did you miss those when we were going through those 13 design sessions to get like the business requirements? How did those get missed, right? It's the that human component, because if regardless of how well you prompt ChatGPT, if it doesn't have all the information, it's not going to come to the right answer as far as the code is concerned. So I still think that element, which I think is the toughest element of creating systems and software, isn't going away anytime soon. I'm all for if we can get from business requirements to showing a product faster because we can have AI write the code for us and show it to the customer. I think that will be a benefit because then they're going to see things and cough up the real business requirements, sooner rather than having to have this long wait for us to code it, right? So I think it's a huge benefit there. I think for the average user, I don't know, unless Microsoft, comes out and starts making this stuff cheaper with Copilot, I don't think it's going to be a huge impact immediately with people. I mean, you think about a Copilot license right now it's like 1.5 times the cost of an Office 365 license, right? It's like $30 versus 20. And for Power BI specifically, you have to run an F64 SKU or a premium SKU in order to be able to use Copilot in Power BI. And so not everybody's going to have that available to them. So I think Microsoft is making a mistake to some degree in not making this stuff more accessible and less expensive for people to deploy within their organizations. They've got 17,000 different Copilots, right? But they're all kind of locked behind, very restricted, I think, very expensive, where you can fire up an OpenAI license for not very much money, and it's better, right, than Copilot is at this point in time. So.
Right, and I think a couple of things you guys have said. There's 2 things. I think one, as I was mentioned, DAX is it's one small part of Power BI. I mean, it's more than just a visual, dashboard tool. It's more than just writing DAX. There's so much to Power BI that I really do think DAX is just a part of the discussion or a part of the requirements in Power BI development. So yeah, get some extra help with DAX from AI, like whatever. That's just a piece of it anyways. And then the second too, a way that I heard how things may begin to change for analysts and such is a part of the role is and is going to become even more to a higher degree like data translators, because even if AI is very involved, you need someone who is actually like working with the AI and also, as it was mentioned, like the business requirements. Here, Larry Vick made a good point here. Business requirement is the heaviest lift, not BI development. Very much to your point, Greg. There's so much to that too, because even working as a Power BI developer myself, there's so much back and forth, reiteration or iteration, a lot of specifics behind everything, and you do still need that human element. So don't want to get too carried away with the whole is AI going to destroy us or take all of our jobs or not. I think we're safe right now. I see it as only a benefit. I don't see it. I haven't seen it take a single person's job up to this point. Everything I've heard from business leaders has been on the contrary, that if anything, it's going to produce more jobs because it's showing the need. But to stray away from that discussion a little bit, I did want to, unless there was any other comments you guys had on that, wanted to kind of navigate the discussion to a different point. But Brian, please.
Yeah, real quick, I kind of believe there are two superpowers now that, AI has kind of changed. It's not going to take jobs to the extent, I think it's going to change jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as data analysts, I think it's going to put a premium on two things. One of which, as Greg mentioned, domain knowledge. I think knowledge of the specific business area that you operate in, the ability to ask the right questions, to understand the nuances when you talk to stakeholders about, there's what stakeholders will tell you they want and what they really want. And the two things are often quite different. And I think understanding the domain well enough to know the difference is really important. And then I think the other thing is communication, as you mentioned, Matt, that I think being the data translator, and I think in some respects, AI has made things much easier for the technical person and much harder for the non-technical, because it's added a whole nother level of learning. It's kind of, the pace is now ridiculous. It changes every week. And so I think, kind of having a trusted analyst, that a stakeholder can rely on and says, okay, I know this person understands the domain, they understand the context, and they're going to tell me what's relevant and, kind of what we need to be focusing on to make the right decisions. And I feel like that, in some sense, that is going to be much more the analyst's job than coding, than, building models. It's really going to be AI kind of offloading a lot of the nuts and bolts stuff, and the analyst really kind of taking that bigger picture and more interpersonal role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that human element, putting everything together, being that translator, that communicator, and the domain knowledge is so important. I'm getting ready this week to post an entire video to YouTube about just that topic of domain knowledge and business acumen fitting into the role of an analyst. So completely agree there. I want to turn to the chat here, because we have 20-ish minutes left, and I want to open up for some Q&A. I know we've had some questions pop into the chat, so if you've been saving some questions, feel free to throw them out now, because we'd love to answer your questions. So I'm going to kind of go through here and see what we got. And if you guys see a good one before I do, please go ahead.
I know early on, Amy Huff had a really good one about, kind of getting your portfolio out in public, kind of how to get that noticed, and, kind of how to get your skills out in the arena for people to see.
This one right here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. You want to share some thoughts on that?
I can, or Greg, Matt,
Go
if
ahead.
you want to,
You go first, Brian. I'm trying to find a thread which talked about this. So you go first.
I think on this one, there are two portfolio sites I really like. I think the Maven site is really excellent. I think the Novi Pro site is really excellent. And I think, you can certainly build your own, WordPress site or blog site, but I think there's some real benefit to kind of having a site that is an aggregator and, brings a lot of traffic to it. And then I think if you can kind of highlight your work on that site, in your own social media posts and in blog articles, in some sense, you kind of accomplish everything you need to by doing that you show technical capability, you show business relevance, you show ability to ask the right questions, and you show ability to explain things. I mean, it was interesting when I worked for Enterprise DNA, we hired all of our content creators, and all of our experts strictly on the basis of their online portfolio and interactions, and put together the best team I've ever worked with. Not a single interview, not a single thing other than what people, kind of put forward to the public online, and put together just an astonishingly good team. Greg was part of that team. And, I think, that's all out there for people to do. The two portfolio sites, kind of getting your content posted. And, Matt, you've had, tremendous success lately, and, kind of getting a huge audience for your content. So, I think kind of talking about how you've been doing that.
Thanks. Yeah, Brian. And I totally echo that point of get a portfolio, like show those, the Maven one is incredible. Building some quality projects and doing a really good job of explaining what you're doing, like your write-up for it. Because there's two mistakes I often see people make. They either don't say enough, it's just a few bullet points, or they say way too much and they turn it into like a book. And you think about a recruiter's just not going to read through that, or a hiring manager or a business leader. They want to understand really quickly and effectively what you're doing and why it matters. And then that online presence. If you put together a project that's on your portfolio, post about it. Post about it several times. Break down specific topics. Post about the project. A few days later, say, this was one thing I faced when I was putting together this project, and here's how I solved it. You could stretch one project into multiple posts, or you could do a blog post on it. It's a lot you could do, and you can kind of build in public and show your knowledge and expertise online for people. And I've seen that work really well. I mean, I didn't interview for the job I have now. So to your point, yeah, Brian, it was exactly what you said. They saw my online presence, and I had a relationship with a couple people in the company because they also are online. And it was just a beautiful relationship, and it turned into an opportunity. So can't stress enough. Just put it all online and talk about it as much as you can. And that's going to serve you very well over time.
And you can post it multiple places. I used to do a lot of that with a lot of my blog posts. I'd post it on LinkedIn. I'd post it on the Power BI community site. I'd post it on my own website, so it was like, and then I'd make a video talking about the blog post, so yeah, I'll just throw out two other places where you can post. I don't know what there was another person that asked what the licenses you need to host the reports on those sites. I don't know the answer to that one. I know one that is absolutely free absolutely free is the data stories gallery on the Power BI community site, right? Basically, all you have to do is have a free Power BI account, and you can publish to web, and then you can post it in the data stories gallery. And then I know one other one that I know that I've seen people use is behance.net. And I don't know if that's free to use or if it requires a license or what it is, but something else. Somebody had just redid my dinosaur report that I had published the data stories gallery because I'm a big dinosaur nerd. So I've done a report on it, and they just did a phenomenal job of rebooting it. Same basic content and everything, but so much better in a lot of ways. So I just became aware of that one through that.
That's awesome. Well, another question here that I think is a good one from Christian is, what is the most critical, important topic to learn when learning Power BI, considering all the info resources? So that's a big question, but curious what you guys think about that.
I'll let Greg go. I've got my
Yeah,
answer.
I need to go first on the last one. So, I think to me it goes back to business requirements gathering and back. That is the most critical thing in domain knowledge, right? I think those are the two biggest things to, and it's not Power BI related, right? Other than you can sometimes, if you know the capabilities of Power BI, you can sometimes helpfully steer the conversation into solutions that Power BI can do easily versus something that you know is going to be problematic within Power BI. I think that's a huge skill and a critical skill to have. So you can because otherwise you're going to be left with expectations from the customer that it's going to be able to do this thing, and then that's going to be super complicated to actually implement in Power BI. And so now you're going to end up with way more development time, way more complex of a solution, and probably an unhappy customer. So to me, that is a critical skill to have when you're gathering those business requirements, is to be able to understand what Power BI is capable of and what it's not.
Yeah, I think that's that's question one, kind of job one. If I were to kind of take it a little more literal in terms of within Power BI itself, I would definitely say data modeling. I think if you can break down a data set and model it into a nice clean star schema, clean your data properly, kind of identify the proper dimensions, the proper level of aggregation, granularity, kind of what dimensions need to be separate, what you can combine. If you can set that up easily, your Power BI journey is going to be easy. That everything falls into place. And if you can't do that well, there's no amount of DAX expertise that'll save you. If your model is broken, Greg answers a ton of forum questions. I have over 1,000 posts on the Enterprise DNA forum, and the vast majority of, I don't know if it's the vast majority, but certainly a large percentage of people who say my DAX doesn't work, it's because your data model's broken. Your DAX is probably okay. Or if your data model was okay, your DAX would fall into place really easily. But with a hopelessly broken data model, you have no chance at DAX. And that's why I think people have the perception that DAX is so hard, because they're jumping into DAX before they've really mastered the data modeling. And if you get that down, it just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, I'll take up every one of those challenges, by the way, in terms of I love the complex, stupidly crazy DAX. I don't know why, but I just love it. I love tackling problems that you should not be solving in DAX. It's just my own personal problem, I guess.
Yeah, I've stumbled across some of your solutions, Greg, as I've troubleshooted in the past, and I'll have some really niche thing, and then I'll see you answering a forum question. I'm like, oh, thanks, Greg.
I think the craziest one was the Holtz-Winters forecasting in Power BI. I knew that would get in DAX. That was a stupidly insane complex. It should never have been done, but I love those kind of stupid challenges.
That was beautiful. That solution had over 122 tables, and it was solvable in 6 lines of R code. So one thing I want to mention is, that in terms of DAX and difficult problems, if folks out there have, a DAX problem that is giving you nightmares, if you can share it with Greg and I, please do. If it's something that isn't, business confidential, we are looking, far and wide for the toughest DAX problems you can find, because when we're talking about testing stuff on AI and kind of looking at the boundaries of what these models can do, it's getting harder and harder to find really tough problems that the AIs haven't been trained in. And so, Greg's found a few of them on the, the forum side. I've been scouting around, but, we're kind of putting out a bounty call for if you've got the nastiest, gnarliest DAX problem you can find, shoot that to us and we will solve it for you, and you'll provide us some great research materials. So win-win.
So there's another question. It just says LinkedIn user, but it's like the second one up there. It's like, how can we gain and improve domain knowledge that are new or transitioning to a career in data world? So this is an interesting thing in terms of, so one of my consultants on my team, what they did was I don't actually do Power BI for my job. The primary part of my practice is actually a Dynamics 365 practice. But somebody on the team came up with just a brilliant idea that I thought was just absolutely brilliant. And what they did was they trained their own GPT on their job, right? So what they did was they took and they created a Dynamics 365 supply chain consultant GPT. And so they went through and tuned it where it favored Microsoft documentation versus, third-party blog articles. They loaded up a bunch of books that were, written on Dynamics 365 and supply chain, and just other supply chain topics. And they use it every day now, right? And they use it as an augmentation of their skills and their job. And they can ask them questions like, how do I ship an order in D365? And it'll come back with the exact instructions on how to do it, or how to do that, how to create a purchase order, whatever it is. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And I thought that you could use that concept to gain domain knowledge, right? What if you wanted to create domain knowledge around the retail industry, right? You could create your own GPT, that's specifically focused on being an expert at everything there is to know about the retail industry. And then you could ask it questions and have it respond back and gain domain knowledge that way. So I don't know, Brian, you're the AI expert here though. So you tell me what's possible, what's not.
The custom GPT stuff I think is spectacular, that I can show you. I built, kind of a whole range. I call them the kaijus. It's basically these monsters where I've taken a whole topic, and whether it's Power BI or DAX, I've taken every authoritative book. I've got all Greg's books. I've got all the SQL BI books. I've got Matt Allington's books. I've got everybody's kind of essential DAX books. I've got the DAX guide. I've got the Microsoft guide. I've got stuff from the community, and it's all loaded into this, this GPT. And the thing, I've got one for regex. I call it regex Rodan, that hasn't missed a question in 4 months. It's basically solved regex, and it can write 10 times better regex than I can. And so, you put these things together. And the one thing that's really unfortunate is OpenAI, they have not figured out how to harden the shell around those. And so I don't feel comfortable, because I really respect the work that authors do and publishers. And so if you can't protect the content that's in there from somebody cracking it and basically taking the books out, you've kind of got to build them on your own for your own purposes. And so the only ones that I post now are kind of public information. But, for my own purposes, Greg, I completely agree. And it's why I was really surprised that Copilot actually removed the GPT builder capability from the Copilot subscription, because I felt that was, for OpenAI, I think, you combine that now with the reasoning model it's got, and that is a powerful combination where you can basically load it with the kind of the top domain knowledge, and then apply this reasoning robot to it. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow. So another question here, because we got 6-ish minutes left. So let's see if we can get one or two more questions. It's an interesting question from Darnell. What is the advantage of using DAX as opposed to using SQL for similar aggregates? Is there a performance advantage?
Yeah, I'll give it my spin. I think there's really only one. and that is that it can be dynamic, right? If you're using SQL to pre-aggregate things, then you're going to lose some of that dynamic aspect of it. But yes, I mean, and it's, what is it, Roche's maximum, right? Try to push all of the data transformations, as far up the chain as possible, back to the data sources, then Power Query, then, if you have to, DAX and that sort of thing. But really that's the primary purpose of DAX, and where DAX should primarily be used is creating measures that are dynamic and can interact with the user. I don't know, Brian, anything additional?
I got nothing to add to that. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think that's a really great explanation of the key difference. Let's see. Looking to see if we can get one more good question here.
There was one from Eladio Bardelli that was line theories. Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, let me pop that on there. That's a good one.
Brian, you want to take a crack at this one?
Oh yeah. Okay. I have strong feelings about this one. In that, one of the things that I think makes DAX hard is that in the past you've not been able to visualize. I mean, it's the dynamic context that Greg was talking about that makes DAX difficult. That it's not static, and so you've got to be able to see what's going on in your DAX as the context is changing. And there typically haven't been good ways to do that. And there now are. And I think, one of the strongest arguments for the no calculate DAX is that it does things primarily in tables, in table variables. And the great thing about table variables is now with the DAX query mode, the tabular editor debugger, and the 2CSV function, which Greg and I both agree is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. You can see what's going on behind the scenes in your DAX in a way you never have been able to do. And I think that inability to visualize what happens, like for me, it's like M is such an easier language to learn because each step you can click and you can see exactly what that step produces. And you can even drill down into like kind of a nested table and see each of the different elements of that nested table. And you can now do that in DAX in a way you never been able to do before. And I think it makes learning and debugging DAX. I mean, there used to be problems that I had a really hard time solving because, when you get into really difficult filter context and all selected changing it and rank X changing it further, it's really hard to visualize what's going on. And now, with these tools, you can really see it. And I think it just makes it a ton easier. And so, for me, the more you can put your DAX into those virtual tables, and, when Greg started espousing this, that was maybe the biggest thing, was just made it easier to see what was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'll add on to that, Brian, you mentioned it, is context and the dynamic context nature of DAX calculations when you're using them in measures, right? If you take a SQL query, against an AdventureWorks database, it's going to return those results. You put it against another AdventureWorks database, it's going to return the same results, right? In DAX, what it returns is completely up to what people have selected in a slicer, what's on a page filter, what's inside the visual, and so
accounting your data model.
Yeah. So accounting for all those boundary cases where, okay, if the user selects everything, if the user selects nothing, if the user selects one thing, the user selects three things, and if this filter is combined with this other filter, it's accounting for all of that sort of stuff that makes, I think, that it adds to the difficulty of DAX, I guess, over SQL.
Makes sense. All right. Well, gentlemen, we're just at about time here. So I wanted to plug your guys' socials. So Greg, you threw some of your stuff in there. Brian, you got a YouTube channel too. Why don't you go ahead and throw that in there, all your stuff. But both these guys have YouTube channels and LinkedIn's. And again, the Microsoft Power BI Cookbook, 3rd edition. Awesome book. Go get it. We had the URL, the Amazon URL for it, thrown in the chat. It's also in the description for this this live event too. If you missed it, so you can go back and check there. Again,
and your note about data modeling, Mike, PACT has another excellent book, Expert Data Modeling with Power BI, that they published, which is a great resource for that. No, that's not my book.
Boom.
And Greg, I'll put one more plug in for Greg's $2 a month Patreon for the and as at the end of that you actually get a copy of the DAX for Humans book, and there's not a better deal going out there. So yeah.
Thanks for hosting, Mike, and thanks for PACT for bringing us all together. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, really glad we got to do this event. Again, honored and humbled to get to be here with you guys. Really great discussion. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining. I hope you got a ton of value out of this chat. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Matt. Very fast hour.
Yeah, flew by. Good stuff, guys.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody, for joining.